Well, guys, if you can believe it, the college football season is winding down. Mike Johnson, Simone Eli joining you for another edition of Alabama football head-to-head. Only 2 weeks remain in the regular season. Alabama will wrap things up at Oklahoma, then back home against Auburn. The Tide finish off Mercer in a good way there at Bryant-Denny last weekend. We'll talk all things that win and look ahead to what the SEC championship game looks like. Let's go head-to-head. Welcome in, everybody. Mike and Simone joining you again. Mike, let's talk briefly about Mercer. I think it looked as we would have expected in this game, 52-7. The final, Alabama really clicking on all cylinders, it seemed like, all day there at Bryant-Denny, and one of those confidence-boosting wins. But I think that Kalen DeBoer kept it in perspective. You never want to get too high or too low this time of year.
No, and I definitely feel like Bama continued to do some of the things this past weekend that's made them successful over the last 3+ games. And that was good to see. I think that's all you really wanted to see from Alabama and Jalen Milroe, this offensive line, really this defense flying around. Good output and exactly what you wanted to see out of Alabama. And these games can go a lot of different ways. Some of them are obviously tighter than you want them to be. When I was in college, we played really tight games against Hawaii and Houston and some of the teams like that, Southern Miss. So when you play a game like this, you deal with business the way you should. Obviously, it's going to make you feel a lot better about where you are pointing towards the next few games, which are going to be pretty difficult. So I'd love to sit here and break down what exactly Alabama did that led to the win over the Mercer Bears over the weekend. But bottom line is, they dealt with business, they got it done, and they can start looking ahead towards the next few opponents.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Seemed like a decently balanced attack overall. Jalen Milroe passed for over 300. And just everything getting done. I should say he actually passed for 200, total 300 as a team. And you saw the rushing attack as well. And so the confidence boost, obviously defense getting it done. Now they go into an Oklahoma team who is in their first year in SEC play. And I think that everyone wondered, what would this look like? Would this be the dominant Oklahoma team that we saw, of course, in the Big 12? How would that translate? In moments, Oklahoma has been really good. And in moments, I think they've gotten their licks a little bit. This isn't like similar to Texas, who has come in and is currently leading the league right now, Mike.
Yeah, it's not. And, the bottom line, when you start looking at what Oklahoma is, they're a flawed football team. I mean, there's no two ways to put it. You look at the fact they've already fired their offensive coordinator this year. They've already, kind of undergone a number of different changes within that organization. And I think the biggest way to kind of sum it up, Simone, is you look at Alabama and they need to win to continue, their march towards hopefully the college football playoff. And Oklahoma right now is dealing with something that is in a little bit of no man's land within their program. It's, do you want to play a bowl game? And it kind of tells you the story of where these two teams are right now. And obviously the coaches down there and everybody else want to play in these bowl games, but it reminds me of covering the NFL. When you talk about the NFL and you start getting towards the last 2 games of the year, you start getting, how hungry are some of these players? Yeah. And are they, just looking for a reason to kind of, take a back seat to the teams that are going to be coming in playing. So Oklahoma's got a game against Alabama, and then they'll be on the road at Baton Rouge to see if they can make it to bowl eligibility. But nonetheless, they're a team that has been up against it this year, have had their ups and downs. And look, they're going to be trying to make things right towards next year. And I know that Brent Venables hasn't forgotten how to coach defense, so it's definitely going to be a tough task.
And you have to be maybe a little bit concerned, Mike, in games like this, when you have a team that's kind of playing with nothing to lose, and you have to believe that Alabama going to Norman for the first time since they joined SEC play, people are going to get up for Alabama. They just do, regardless of who it is. And a newcomer into the league, they're going to be excited from a fan base perspective. That Brent Venables is a defensive guy, just a hard-nosed guy. He's going to have his guys just fired up for this game. If you're Kalen DeBoer, I think he said something that I thought just really, really was great, not only as a head coach, but you can take it into being a dad or being a husband or whatever. He said, he's always the same guy. He never gets too high in big emotional moments that are exciting. He never gets too low. He's always on to the next one. He was like that as a player. He mentioned it. He's like that as a coach. And I think that it serves you well in times like this when you go to Oklahoma and you don't want to have a hiccup. And then, of course, you're at home in the Iron Bowl, and we know, regardless of where anybody is at this point, you throw out the resumes and you never know what's going to happen in that game. Mike, you have to be consistent.
Yeah, and look, I'm with Coach DeBoer on that. I think that is a good thing from his perspective, that you never want to be too high, too low. I think honestly, looking at it from where we're sitting, the problem comes in when you run into a buzzsaw where you're kind of right here and the other team might be down here sometimes, and all of a sudden they are high and low. So I think that's the curiosity you'll be looking at over the next couple of weeks. And I do think that, look, Coach Saban was very consistent to me in terms of what he was. He always had a little bit of that anger. He was always on edge just a little bit. You knew that, at any point he could kind of fly out the handles if you were not practicing and playing up the standard that so many guys had set. With that being said, there were times that Coach Saban would step into a locker room and you could feel more intensity. I'll never forget the speech he gave before we played LSU in 2008, because you knew that was a big game for him. And he stepped in there with a lot of intensity and kind of delivered that speech for us. And so there were a number of times throughout my tenure that Coach Saban felt more amped up, and probably would never admit it. He would probably say, like Coach DeBoer, that he wanted to be as consistent as possible.
Naturally,
but look, it's one of those opportunities. When you look at Oklahoma as a team, we can get further into that about what they try to do or what they do well, what they don't do well. But I think it's interesting to kind of look at it from a perspective of just the SEC. I was talking to one of my Oklahoma buddies, and he was like, we've struggled this year in our first year in the SEC. One of the things that's kind of not caught them off guard, but that they're not good at yet, is night games. I was like, how is that even possible? It's like Oklahoma just hasn't historically played as many huge night games as it feels like they've played here in year one of the SEC. So I thought that was interesting. The fact that, Bama's going on the road to Norman, Oklahoma, and you've seen the theatrics in, Bryant-Denny and Death Valley, and you saw it, Tennessee taking on Georgia this past weekend, the fireworks show, the light displays. I thought that was pretty interesting to think about.
Yeah, that is interesting. You don't really think about it like that. It'll be a 6:30 kickoff there at Oklahoma. And I have to go back a good ways to see Oklahoma's last SEC win. Okay, it would have been September 28th against Auburn, and in a game that they should have lost. And I'm just saying that because I cover Auburn, they should have lost the game, or Auburn should have won the game, is what I should say.
Yeah, I agree.
But is that their only SEC win?
That's their only SEC win.
Oh man. Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. And so it's one of those things where Brent Venables is a head coach in an era of football where defensive head coaches don't often get a lot of love because people want to see so many points put on the board. And I think that at the end of the day, when you have a defensive-minded head coach, people will start saying, you have a defensive-minded head coach. That's why you're not good. It's just in 2024, that's the way it is in college football. Mike, what do you see from this team as Alabama enters? Really only as a 2-touchdown favorite, however.
Yeah, and look, I think that Oklahoma, while they're not a very good football team, they still do have a ton of talent. And if if we could just focus just on the offense for just 1 second, I believe the number right now is 7 different starting offensive line combinations for Oklahoma, which is just absolutely impossible to think about when you think about the cohesion along an offensive line and what it takes to go win a championship. I think in 2009 when we went 14-0, I think we had 2 different starting combinations. And most of those were in games that felt unimportant. So it just, I just think that, when you look at it, the cohesion they don't have up front has really reflected in what Jackson Arnold is at quarterback. He's been in and out of the lineup. He has really struggled to pass the ball. Now, they're coming off a bye week, so I do expect some wrinkles to be thrown in there. Jackson Arnold actually caught a touchdown pass a couple of weeks ago in their matchup with Missouri, so you'll look for some of those things. But if you just look at this offense on the surface, they are going to attempt to run the football because, simply put, they are not good at pass protection and they're not good at throwing the football, down the field. So can Alabama's defensive line tee off? Can they get after those guys up front? The defensive line unit, one of my old teammates, Freddie Roach, who's the defensive line coach at Alabama, has really done such a good job with that unit. And really, there's guys that are playing well, and there's guys trying to scratch and claw to the top of the heap as being, the starters. And so I think that's a really good unit right now. They're definitely going to be up to task this weekend because I think a lot sits on their shoulders.
Yeah, it certainly does. And when you just look at where the SEC is right now as a whole, Mike, we talked about this a little bit in pre-show, and I think that this is just the hot topic right now in all of college football is what is this playoff going to shape up, and what is it going to look like? If you've watched any of the playoff standing shows, they're kind of hard to watch because honestly, they have like the color coding and they have like the key down at the bottom, and you're trying to figure out like, okay, they're projecting this person to be the SEC champion. I mean, it kind of takes away from what the playoff show used to be when they had the standings out, because that was like, all right, here's where the committee is right now. Now they're trying to like have their, crystal ball and determine who is going to win the conference. Right. What I think the concern right now is, at least for teams in the SEC, there's so many 2-loss teams, and we've started doing the math, and the math makes you wonder, is it almost a negative to be playing in the SEC championship game, Mike. And right now, Alabama's road to being in Atlanta next month looks better than it did when we were talking last week, of course, with Georgia beating Tennessee. What do you think, looking at all of the math? I mean, now Alabama can win out. I think Missouri wins. People were saying it, and depending on what happens, Texas A&M, it could be Bama there in Atlanta. If they're a 3-loss team, are they going to get penalized and not be in the playoffs because they lost in the title game that nobody else had to play in?
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. Now, as a player, and I'm hoping Alabama's players don't think of it that way, because I do think if they face off with Texas, they would have a very good shot at beating Texas. And so it does feel like a penalty to where you feel like if Alabama gets in and were to lose to Texas in Atlanta, that they might even be shown their way out of the playoff while, getting leapfrogged by teams like Georgia or Ole Miss or Tennessee, who beat Alabama, just a few weeks ago. So it does feel like a little bit of a penalty, if we're being honest. I know Lane Kiffin has spoken out about it. I've heard from a bunch of people around college football that are like, yeah, I think we're good not playing in Atlanta. It feels a little outdated, if we're being honest. I mean, it just feels like it's something they might eventually have to do away with one way or another. I know that there's talk of 9 SEC games or whatever else there might be going on. It would make me sick to see it get to that point. But it's just one of those years where everybody's kind of beat up on everybody in the SEC. So you feel like that third loss, could that prevent whoever goes to that SEC title game from being able to make the college football playoff? And I don't think that this is just a this year conversation, Simone. I think that you're going to see maybe in future where you look at a 12-team playoff and where there's a first-round bye, right? You might see some of these teams be penalized by playing this game, not simply by being left out of the playoff, but let's fast forward to next year where a team is maybe ranked 6 going into the championship weekend. And now all of a sudden, maybe they're on the road in the first round. And maybe that's one of the things that kind of outpaces where we're at for the championship game. So I look at it and think it's a penalty. It's a penalty as far as the universities go for playing the SEC title game. Am I still going to be very, very proud if Bama goes to the SEC title game? Am I going to show up at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in downtown Atlanta where I live? Absolutely. Do I hope the players are focused and locked in on that game if they get the chance? Yes. And so that's kind of where I finish with it at, because the bottom line is, if you are Alabama, focus on winning every game ahead of you and then focus on getting a first-round bye. You go in there and win that game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium if you're Alabama, and you have a automatic spot in the quarterfinal. You might be looking at a Sugar Bowl matchup with the Georgia Bulldogs, who you've already beat this year. So anything can happen given those scenarios. It's we don't know how it's going to play out. And Simone, let's be honest, we never know what's going to happen in college football. And you look at rivalry week 2 weekends from now, one of these teams is going to lose to their rival. Ole Miss to Mississippi State, Tennessee to Vanderbilt, Georgia to Georgia Tech, Alabama to Auburn, whoever it might be. One of these teams is going down. So it's interesting to think about now. And I think it's just one of those unintended consequences that, that are out there now with the expanded SEC and the expanded playoff.
And I think that one thing that just in everything that you mentioned, Mike, totally spot on. You add in the fact that's another 4 quarters of football beating on your body, another 4 quarters of football that you could get hurt. Let's just say you win the game. Well, let's say you have a star player, and I'm not even going to say a name because I'm not going to put this in the universe, but let's just say that I ain't doing that. People are not going to come back on me. I'm a knock. If people ain't going to come back on me for nothing, I'm just saying. For anybody in the SEC or in any conference, it's another 4 quarters. And if you're already feeling like you're in, right, because Bama's been in all year as the highest ranked 2-loss team all year, but if you already feel like you're in, you don't really want to go play in a game where you could risk losing someone that would be detrimental to a possible playoff push anyway.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all pans out, but Bama's just in one of those weird spots where it really feels impossible at this point for Bama to host a playoff game. As much as you feel like they're in the driver's seat of their own destiny, it doesn't seem like there's any road to where Bama could be in that 5 to 8 seat as it sits right now. I'm just happy that Bama controls their own destiny at this point, I guess. After some of the losses we've seen early in this year, some of the questions you and I have had to answer on here about Kalen DeBoer and Kane Womack and everybody else, that this team, for whatever reason, in the last few weeks, seems to be finding its stride and, seems to be getting its legs back up under them. So I think it's exciting from that standpoint, at least.
And I also think that it speaks to just where we are in college football right now. And we could do a show, another hour, just talking about where college football is with the parity of college football. And I think we knew coming into the year things were going to look different. Transfer portal is wide open. Now we got money that's legal. We have coaches that, are at one program 1 minute, somewhere else the next as a coordinator, and guys flipping and flopping everywhere in conference. And I just think that it's not as strange to have a loss or 2 losses. And that's why we have 800 teams with 2 losses sitting here in the mix of it for the playoffs, Mike. And it's not what it used to be when you played, when you needed to be undefeated to be one of the top 2 in the BCS. And it isn't even what it was when we dealt with the 14 playoff. It is uncharted territory. And I mean, I think the committee's probably sitting there being able to say, we kind of get to write whatever this looks like, because they do. They get to be able to determine whether they've ever played football. I don't want to talk about that. Just like so many different things that you can go into as to who's on the committee and why they're there and what they're determining. And there's people that are associated with teams that are on the committee that are in, it's just, there's a lot of politics to it, and you hate that in sport. But is there a right answer? Is this it? Who knows? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. And I don't think there's a right answer. The Bear Bryant video that plays in Bryant-Denny Stadium, the same things win that always won. I feel that way about the college football playoff. I feel that way. They're probably sitting there going, we thought, after the BCS, we were getting rid of the argument of most deserving versus best, right? It's like, who's the best team? Who's the most deserving? Yet that came back around with the 14 playoff, and you saw it last year. Was Florida State deserving? Yeah. Were they better than Alabama? I don't know. And obviously, a lot's happened since then, so it's hard. But here we go again. Is it most deserving or is it best? And I think, look, and I'll give credit to Mackenzie Brooks. She works for CBS Sports Network. I was watching her, and I think she's talking to Danny Cannell, and she's like, Indiana would be an underdog to at least 7 SEC teams, SEC teams, maybe even 8, which is mind-boggling to think about, because right now they're in the driver's seat, and there's a very good chance they could end the year with 1 loss. Now they're going to face off with Ohio State, but if they lose that Ohio State game, might not make the Big Ten championship, and that might be their only loss of the year, as they'll have Purdue in their finale, which makes you sick to think about if you're, like I said, an Ole Miss team and kind of on that fringe, and after dealing with business over the last few weeks. So you're right. There's so much pageantry involved in it, and there's no clear definition of which way these people are supposed to go.
All right, Mike. Well, we will certainly see how this shapes up. It is a wild time in college football, no doubt about that. Guys, Alabama will be at Oklahoma, a night game in Norman. It's going to be uncharted territory. It's going to be a little strange, guys. I think the Alabama players, you get so familiar with going to the same SEC stadiums, and now Oklahoma's an SEC stadium. That's weird just to say, by the way. So we'll see what it looks like. Mike, if you had to predict what this game looked like, Alabama only a 2-touchdown favorite. Should I say only? I don't know. How do you feel about that?
It seems pretty big, honestly.
Okay.
And what you're dealing with. And look, Simone, here's what I want Alabama fans to know going in this matchup. This is a good defense. Brent Venables has not simply forgotten how to coach defense. They've had their ups and downs offensively. And this seems like these games are very similar over the next couple of weeks. Where Auburn, you have an offensive scheme that's been up and down. You've been up and down in the quarterback position, but really there's still a pretty good defense. For Oklahoma, it's particularly the defensive front, very, very good against the run game. Have had a lot of success this year against running quarterbacks. And so I'll be curious to see what Bama's game plan will be. But if they're able to put up some explosives early in the game, I don't know that Oklahoma will have a chance to really kind of come back at that, because I think they lack that offensive firepower, even though I'm very nervous coming off of a bye week of what their game plan might be, because there will be some trickery. They have nothing to lose with that program right now. And so you'll be curious to see what they bring to the table. But very good defensive front. I think Alabama's offensive line is up to bat once again this week. Can they block for Jalen Milroe? And can we get the running game going north and south? You and I have talked about this time and time again and pounded the table. When Jalen Milroe is going north and south as opposed to the sideline, that's when Bama's very, very dangerous. So spread on this one, like you said, a couple of touchdowns. I think this game's pretty tight, probably in the middle of the second quarter, maybe going into halftime. I think in the end, Jalen Milroe can do enough with his legs, hit some explosives to Ryan Williams. I look for this one to be somewhere in the, let's call it 31-17, 31-14 range when it's all said and done. I think Bama's defense is playing at a high level right now, but some trickery might get to you at some point with a team that has nothing to lose and is looking for bowl eligibility. So hopefully Bama do the things they need to continue on this journey, and we'll be talking about even more chaos a week from today.
Cannot wait, of course, as Alabama will then turn the page to the Iron Bowl to wrap things up at Bryant-Denny this year, by the way. I like it. I'm similar, maybe, low 30s, mid 30s, 35. I think that Oklahoma probably does put a couple of touchdowns on the board, maybe 35-14, something like that. Let's not count out that Brent Venables has coached in national championship games. This is a guy who's familiar with Alabama even. I mean, he knows what it takes to win, and there's Oklahoma guys who have played in big games too, be it in the Big 12, maybe not in the SEC, but certainly people that know how to win late in the season. But when you have nothing to lose, that's a little part of the game where it just scares you a little bit if you're an Alabama team with everything to lose at this time. So we'll see what it looks like. A 6:30 kickoff on ABC there in Norman between Alabama and Oklahoma. Looking forward to this one. And of course, we will talk about the Iron Bowl a week from now. So looking forward to that. Mike Johnson, appreciate it. This has been Head to Head, and we will see you next week.
Brought to you by Alabama Beef Farmers and Ranchers.